My grandmother named me after a Hindu god, and when I was explaining this to a friend of mine, she responded, "Oh, so we should just call you God?" And I thought, yes, yes, you should. And yeah, that's the short answer. If you clicked into this video looking for God, here I am. Hello everyone, and welcome to my world. So, as the title suggests, we're going to talk about God, but before we start that, a little bit about myself. I was raised Hindu. I know, big surprise. Hinduism is a vast and varied religion with numerous subcategories and interpretations, but I think a big theme in the religion is the idea that all our deities are facets of one God or almighty power. We believe that God exists in everything and everyone, from the smallest particles of sand to mountains and oceans and ants and bats and humans. A lot of Hindu gods represent natural systems such as rain, sun, or rivers. Many gods also represent constructs such as wealth, intelligence, or justice. Now, I'm not trying to advocate for Hinduism here. Seeing the rise of Hindu nationalists makes me sick, and I want to stress that the only people worsening the situation for Hindus are politicians, police, and similar corrupt organizations. It's a tale as old as time. Evil systems take control, they use an already ostracized group as a scapegoat for all the country's problems, and radicalize civilians into enacting hate crimes against these vulnerable groups of people. Suddenly, Hitler adopting the swastika as his symbol seems prophetic. I don't think this makes Hinduism any worse than any other religion out there. I mean, from what I've seen, any religion can be used as a force for good or evil. But let's talk about the weird stories that come from the Hindu mythos for a second. It is believed that Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiv came into existence first, and they came into contact with Shakti. Shakti literally translates to energy, power, or strength, but in this instance, I think it's referring to this ethereal life force. And Shakti then splits into three and provides each of these male gods with a wife, and there are goddesses. Now, goddesses take many forms, in different stories, whether it is to protect different realms, assist other male gods, or destroy evil, and so do the male gods. But both male and female gods can create or birth new gods. Usually it's out of their sweat or sandalwood or budding fodder, but rarely through sexual reproduction. So I'm not sure why they needed goddesses to generate life, but that's how the story goes. I suppose it's a bit reminiscent of the idea of the Big Bang. And as we go along, you'll notice that there are a lot of stories within the Hindu mythos that is loosely reminiscent of scientific theories. Let's talk about Shiv and Parvati. Shiv's wife is Parvati. Shiv is an interesting character. He's usually an outcast. He's not really someone who has a lot of arrogance. He's got a really bad temper, but he also portrays a lot of humility. He prefers to spend his time with beasts rather than humans or other gods, considering them more honest and finding it a lot easier to present himself in the company of creatures. He gets fed poison. Someone's trying to kill him, and Parvati finds out and she strangles his neck. Now, this for some reason doesn't kill him, the asphyxiation, but it does protect him from the poison that would have killed him. Yeah, I don't know how to do the biology of that, all of that, but what it does is it pools the poison in his neck, turning his neck blue, which also results in him getting the nickname Nilgund, meaning blue-necked. But, you know, Shiv is often portrayed as having blue skin all over, not just in his neck. So we're gonna get into that later. But first let's talk about more of Shiv and Parvati's relationship and how weird it gets. So Parvati is looking for some me time, you know, as anyone would. And she realizes that no one in the pantheon is going to stand up against Shiv, because he's so powerful. She decides to sculpt a child out of the sandalwood paste that she uses to clean herself, and she breathes life into this child and names him Ganesh. She then tells Ganesh to stand guard outside the bathhouse while she bathes herself, and that's what he does. And Shiv comes along looking to speak to his wife and is stopped at the gate by this random kid, and the kid's like, "You shall not pass." And Shiv doesn't take this very well. You know, he's not used to being told no. In a very reasonable manner, Shiv decapitates Ganesh. I know. It's a good thing it gets weirder. Parvati is very upset, understandably so. So Shiv has to go on this journey to find a suitable replacement head so he can bring Ganesh back to life. I'm not quite sure why he couldn't use the original head, but as the story goes, Shiv goes on his journey, finds an elephant, decapitates the elephant, and then attaches the elephant head to Ganesh's body, and our elephant-headed god is born. While all gods are supposed to be versions of the same power, and you actually see it there. We have these two massive prayers or poems that basically list 1,000 names for all the male gods, including Shiv, Vishnu, and Brahma, and all the incarnations that they may take, as well as the female god, the goddesses, Saraswati, Parvati, and Lakshmi, and all the different incarnations they take. But the children that are born to these gods are rarely ever female. I can't think of an example. And they're also not considered the same, like they're not listed as part of the 1,000 names of the male gods. So yeah, going on the weird relationship dynamics of Shiv and Parvati. They have to face this monster, and no one can defeat it, and no one's powerful enough, and Shiv and Parvati realize that the only way they can defeat this monster is if they come together and form a new being called Ardhanarishwar. Ardhanarishwar literally means Ardha, half, Nari, wife or woman, Ishwar, god, referring to Shiv, I suppose. And it's very common for Hindu women to be taught that their husbands are gods. And it's kind of absurd. It's just sad that in a story that's talking about how, you know, the polar extremes of gender aren't the be-all and end-all, that we all find ourselves in a, you know, within the spectrum of these two extremes. But we don't even recognize the woman as her own self, you know, with her own agency. Anyway, so the final story about these two is, again, there's a monster A lot of these stories are about monsters and demons. And funnily enough, they're usually about monsters and demons who did some, like, they meditated, or, you know, they devoted a really large part of their life towards a god, and the god is impressed by this devotion and this meditation and comes down to earth and grants these demons a gift, a divine gift. And those demons proceed to use this divine gift to wreak havoc, and some other god has to come and save the day. So there is this monster who cannot be killed, most likely because of a divine gift. And every time someone tries to kill him, he just, you know, either grows back whatever he's lost or reconnects and continues on, and there's just no way to stop him. So Parvati takes on the form of Kali, Kalima. She is also often depicted as blue-skinned. And again, we'll get back to that at the end, but Kali basically has to go and murder this monster and then drink all of his blood to make sure that he does not revive. But all this monster blood drinking kind of sends her off into a murderous rage. And to stop her, I mean, no god can, because, you know, yeah, girl power. Okay. To stop her, Shiv lays his body down in her footsteps, and when she steps on him, she suddenly realizes who she is and what she's done, and oh my god, your husband is your god. So that's Shiv and Parvati. Next up we have some stories about Vishnu. Now, Vishnu canonically has 10 incarnations, and you know, you could argue that they're reminiscent of the theory of evolution. The first incarnation he takes is Matsya, or fish. The second is Kurma, or turtle. And then the third is a boar. It's Varaha, or boar. I don't know why that's the logical step after the turtle, but that's what the story says. And the next one is Narsimha, who is a half man and a half lion. His top body is lion, his bottom body is man. And he actually, his story is surrounded around this demon prince who is very devoted to God. And the demon king is not happy about this. So he invites his sister to try and assassinate his own child. His sister, Holi, has received a divine gift herself, of this shawl or a wraparound, this like bit of cloth, and it protects her from fire. So she enters a room with her nephew, has the room lit on fire, and then sits there to watch her nephew burn, except because the nephew has gods behind him, there is a gust of wind that blows the shawl off her and protects the child instead, and she burns alive. This event is actually also considered the reason we celebrate Holi. I mean, I imagine the real reason is that it's a harvest festival and people want to, because it happens in spring, and people want to celebrate the harvest by throwing colors at each other. But there's also a religious connotation, and that comes from this particular story where Holi is defeated by fire. And the day before you actually have the Holy Colors playing event, it's custom for people around a neighborhood to come together and have a bonfire. And during this, people would throw away negative things from their past. Like if someone wants to quit smoking, they might throw away there's a pack of cigarettes, or if someone wants to forget about someone, they might throw away their photographs and things like that. Just negative habits or negative aspects of your life that you want to purge out and begin anew. And that's a bit of context for Holi. So now that his sister has failed at killing his son, the king decides to do it himself, and this is when Narsimha arrives, I believe out of one of the pillars of the castle, arrives in his full glory, grabs this king, throws him on his lap. He doesn't have a chair. He's just that powerful, just created a lap without a chair. Throws him on his lap, rips his torso apart, grabs the entrails, and then wears the entrails as a garland. I don't know why that was necessary, but the demon prince is saved, who then becomes king, and the kingdom turns good or whatever. Yay. Vishnu reincarnating as a dwarf man and then as a monk with a really bad temper. I mean, that's his distinctive feature, is that he's a priest or a scholar and has a really bad temper. And after that is Ram. Vishnu takes the form of Ram. Now, I don't know if you know this, but Hinduism is known for two great epics. They're not the only stories within the mythos, but they are two epic stories, basically. They're very long and they've been written down, and they have a few different versions of them. But with Ram, the story is called Ramayan, after his name. His story basically goes, he is born to a king, the king has 3 wives, he wins his wife Sita, who I think is supposed to be Lakshmi reincarnated as Sita. I think Sita actually is born from the earth, like she's found on a piece of land, and the idea is that she was actually put there by the earth itself and the ground itself. But anyway, she has a Swayamvar, which means it's like the Bachelorette, except the Bachelorette doesn't actually have a choice, even though the word Swayamvar would indicate that she chooses her husband herself. She doesn't. The king decides this is the rule, and whoever wins this challenge gets her hand in marriage. And the challenge was that the suitors had to try and string a bow, like a bow and arrow bow, Shiv's bow actually. They had to try and string Shiv's bow, and no one can do it except Ram, who's a child at this point. He actually breaks the bow trying to string it, and the king decides, that's good enough, you can have my daughter. They get married, but then things aren't so great because the other wives of Ram's father are not happy about who might become king after their husband dies. So some plotting and scheming happens. The resulting situation is that Ram is sentenced to 14 years in a forest as punishment. Sita, like the good little Indian girl she is like, I'm going to follow in my husband's footsteps and go live in the forest myself, teaching all the good Hindu women how to behave around their husbands. Okay, Lakshman, one of his brothers, joins him as well because he loves Ram. That's just how that goes. So they go into the forest. Ram and Lakshman go after this deer who's beautiful and enchanting, and they want to hunt it down. And before Lakshman leaves, he creates this salt circle around the house to protect Sita, and he's like, don't leave the salt circle. As long as you're within the salt circle, you're protected. This random priest arrives. So back in the day especially, priests and scholars and such, lived a humble life, which meant that they couldn't take up a profession that would actually give them money. So they survived on the good graces of the people around them, which meant that a lot of them were beggars. So this monk arrives begging for food, and Sita wants to give it to him, and there's some manipulation happening. She decides to leave the salt circle. It turns out that the monk is actually Ravan, who is the king of Lanka, now known as Sri Lanka, who in Hinduism, in India anyway, is thought of as a monster. But I think in Sri Lanka, he's actually thought of as the good guy in the story. So their version is, in their version, I think Ram is the villain, but of course, in India, in Hinduism, Ram is the hero. So Ravan actually sent one of his sisters to to turn into a deer and distract Ram and Lakshman so he could steal Sita. So he does. He steals Sita, takes her off to Sri Lanka, and he basically just gives her a really pretty garden and tells her to do whatever as long as she stays in the garden. It's not that bad other than the fact that she's not with her husband. So Ram and Lakshman rally the forces. They create this magical bridge between the southern point of India and Sri Lanka. And the way they do it is they have stones with Ram's name engraved onto them, and these stones apparently won't sink as long as they have his name. So all the forest creatures and everyone just bands together and creates this bridge, and they all end up in Sri Lanka, and they defeat Ravan, and it's great, and Sita is saved and brought back home, and then the 14 years end, and they all can go back to their kingdom, and Ram can become the rightful king. When they're back, some people are not certain of Sita's purity, that she'd been abducted by another man for so long. How can we know that she's truly pure? So Ram has Sita do an Agni Pariksha, which literally translates to fire test, and that's basically what it is. She's supposed to walk through fire to prove that she is still pure, and she does that, and she's fine, because she's pure. Nothing happens to her, and she comes out fine. But at the end of it, when Ram's like, oh, that's great, we can, go back to being a happy couple, she's like, no man, you doubted me, I proved you wrong, now I'm going my own way because, you are not someone I want to be with, which I'm like, yes. She actually ends up having twins, Ram's sons, and they grow up without knowing who their father is, and like a lot of drama happens, but I think at the end of it, Ram meets his sons, and then Sita is like, oh my god, you found each other, my work here is done, and she goes back to the earth where she came from. That's the very brief story of Ramayana. Now, the next incarnation Vishnu takes is Krishna, and Krishna arguably is one of the most famous gods from India, or from the Hindu religion, and he is also depicted as having blue skin. And one of the reasons this might be the case is because when he was a kid, he was actually targeted by a demon whose breast milk was poisoned. And yeah, he drank her milk. It didn't do anything to him, but he sucked her life out with her milk. And he also turned blue because of the poison. So yeah, that's one thing. But Krishna was actually born in captivity. His mother's wedding day was being celebrated by her brother, who was also the king in the area. And on that day, he received a prophecy that one of his sister's children will kill him. So this king decided to keep his sister and brother-in-law imprisoned. And every time she gave birth to a child, he would kill the child. Why he didn't just imprison them in separate prisons? Who can tell? Krishna was born, except during his birth, because he's a god. Deus Ex Machina, all the prison gates are open, and his father manages to take him away and replace him with a friend's child. So Krishna is actually raised by adoptive parents. And after he finds out about his lineage, goes and kills his uncle, frees his parents and takes his place as the rightful king of that kingdom. This different story comes into contact with Krishna's existence. So the other epic, other than Ramayana, is Mahabharata. And in Mahabharata, what happens is there are these two brothers. They each have wives. One of the older brother's wife gives birth to 5 children, 5 boys. The younger brother's wife gives birth to 100 boys. Basically, she's having trouble giving birth, and they go to this scholar priest person who takes like this embryo out of her womb, cuts it into 100 pieces, puts it in jars, puts each piece in a jar, and so are born the 100 brothers. Test tube babies? This set of 100 brothers basically steals the kingdom from the set of 5 brothers, and the 5 brothers have to live in exile with their mother. And one of them, Arjun, expert marksman, happens to be around, like nearby town, and he finds out about a Swayamvar. Yes, another one. The challenge in this one is that you have to shoot an arrow into the eye of a wooden fish that is circling on the ceiling, and the only way you can do that, you can't look straight up at it. You have to look at the reflection underneath in water, and you have to shoot the arrow, and no one except Arjun is able to do this, so he gets Draupadi as his prize, and he brings her home to introduce her to his mother, saying, "Look, mother, look what I brought. I won this prize." And the mother is like, "Whatever it is, all 5 brothers should share." And that was it. They decided, well, she said it, Draupadi gets to marry all 5 brothers. So yeah, that happened. Later on, the 5 brothers decide that they have to take their kingdom back because rightful royalty or whatever, and they go into battle. The 5 brothers set ends up getting Krishna on their side, even though the 100 brothers set ends up getting Krishna's troops on their side. But the 5 brothers set wins because obviously Krishna is on their side. And during this battle, Krishna spends a majority of it talking to Arjun and basically departing knowledge onto him in the form of couplets. A lot of it is to do with, making Arjun feel less guilty about killing his own cousins. And saying, you're just destroying the mortal coil, his immortal soul continues living, and you're in the middle of a battle right now, so you can't think about these things, and you have to go on doing something that you don't believe in so you can get the thing that you do believe in. These couplets have been written down as a separate book called the Bhagavad Gita. So yeah, that happens. The 5 brothers set win, and they get their kingdom back, and that's the Mahabharata, the other epic. The next incarnation of Vishnu happens to be Gautam Buddha. Yeah, that Buddha, born Siddhartha. He had a wife and a kingdom, and he had a child, and he never knew of pain, and he ran out of his house one night to find out what the outside world was like, realized that so many people are suffering from disease and scarcity of food, and instead of being charitable to these people, using his power to make their lives better, he just runs away to become a priest. Now, I'm not, someone who's well versed in Buddhism and its history. I would love to know what they have to say about this, but the Hindu side of things, even though they want to show him as this, amazing person who made this amazing sacrifice to go out and find these truths about how to avoid pain and suffering in life. So yeah, the story doesn't make him seem all that charitable when I start thinking about it, but that's just my opinion. The final incarnation of Vishnu is Kalki, who is supposed to bring about the apocalypse. So, I think that's all the stories I have for now to share that I thought were interesting. The blue skin thing, one of the arguments I've heard is that often these gods or deities are described as having dark skin, which is probably why they're portrayed with the color blue. I don't know what the logic is there, because, yeah, they're different colors, aren't they? Although, funnily enough, I live in Ireland now, and in Irish, the word used to describe black people isn't the word for the color black, but in fact the word for the color blue. So if there are people out there getting Blue Lives Matter tattooed on themselves in Irish, they've probably just said Black Lives Matter in Irish. So that's a thing. Another reason could be because a lot of these gods appear along with humans in their stories, and the color blue has this ethereal, celestial connotation to it. When we look up to the heavens to look for God, we see a blue sky, and it's notorious for it's notoriously difficult to produce blue in nature, so that might be part of the reason. But I do have to question whether there's a bit of internalized racism going on. Going back to this idea of, you know, gods being in everything and everyone, and how when you actually look into Hindu mythological stories, they're not shown as morally correct. They're not you know, objectively right. They're not shown as the heroes with the right morality on their side. They're often flawed human beings with their own vices, and fall prey to issues that they create themselves. And I think a better way to look at this would be my religion, because remember, I'm God. And my message is, I think we're all gods, all of us. I think we are gods, I think the creatures around are gods, I think the resources that this earth provides us with is also God. I think that we should look at what's around us and within us, where we are, rather than look up for a higher power. Look, you know, instead of looking for some superior entity to save us, that we should look at each other and ourselves with love and respect and devotion. You know, we move through time and space affected by forces often outside our control, connecting at opportune moments. But even though they're outside our control, we can choose to do the next best thing in the wake of our knowledge. I know that my viewpoint is idealistic, and I don't promise happiness or success or even actualization. In fact, I promise nothing, because that's how cults work. Cult? What? No! I don't know what I'm saying there. This is not a cult, that would be inappropriate. But for a small price of €200, maybe we could work something out. All jokes aside, we've been in a pandemic since almost the start of the year, and we really need to start treating each other and our lives with more respect. Governments across the globe have been trying to restart the economy, but every time that happens, a wave of increased diagnoses accompany, and we are back into a lockdown. It's so important that we all keep a mask on when we are in contact with people outside our household. Please take this seriously, so we can all move out of this in good health and in good shape. I hope you enjoyed this. I've had a great time working on this. This was really fun. Peace out.